Chapter 21. The remote-controlled motorboat made a last circle around the final offer to allow Stephanie to descend. She and Cassandra shared half-hearted smiles before she picked up the radio and informed Tim everyone was accounted for. "Good," Tim said. "I'm going to bring it back to the bunker now. There should be a scanner underneath one of the seat cushions, next to a flotation device. Can you find it? Should be shaped like a blow-dryer." After some rummaging, Stephanie pulled up the device and showed it to Cassandra. "Yeah, I found it." "Give it a run over his body and suit," Tim said. "It'll scramble any radio or Wi-Fi signals he might be giving off. I don't want his boss to be able to track him." Stephanie complied as she exchanged uneasy looks with Cassandra, and they got a better look at the Oddmance's body. "This is just nasty," she said. "A lot of these are way too faded. He's had them for a long time." "Thought so too," Cassandra said. Tim's scanner didn't pick up anything initially, but softly beeped several times when Stephanie turned the Oddmance over and ran the device over his neck. "Oh my God, apparently he's chipped like a dog." She laid a hand on the small mark at the nape of his neck. "Do you think Lipov did all this?" "I don't know," Cassandra said. "Seems inconsistent," Tim said over the radio. "I thought he was supposed to be Lipov's finest accomplishment. Maybe he's been out on a lot of assignments. Had a lot of chances to get hurt. I'm setting the boat on autopilot so I can get to a place we can rendezvous. See you two in a bit." Stephanie and Cassandra sat back and let the boat carry them. Each wondered what all the events of the night really meant. Cassandra's focus remained on the scar around the boy's throat, wide enough she could see it even when he was turned over. After an hour of silent travel by boat, the vehicle finally stopped at an abandoned harbor 12 miles from downtown. A single armored truck waited near the pier, and Tim revealed himself with the glow of a flashlight. The three loaded the unconscious Oddmance into the back of the truck. A modified wheel stretcher sat in the center, where the assassin was laid and restrained. None of them said much. Cassandra and Stephanie looked down at the Oddmance from time to time to ensure he hadn't stirred. He was motionless apart from his breaths. After another 30 minutes of travel and 15 loading the enemy into the bunker, Tim went to work running x-rays and analyses while Stephanie made coffee. Cassandra sat next to Tim as the data slowly rolled in. The scans revealed fractures in the skeleton and images upon images of scarred skin. After initiating communications, Alfred's face sat in the lower left side of the computer monitor. "I'm not a doctor, but I can still tell this is really bad," Tim said. "Can I get a professional second opinion, Al?" "Broken bones are rarely a positive, Master Timothy," Alfred said, "but none of the damage looks permanent. One of his arms and his ribs got the worst of it." "Try to be careful," Cassandra said. "Breaking the ribs in CPR isn't really a bad thing." Stephanie passed mugs to Tim and Cassandra. "You know, considering the alternative." "You might be interested to know about that mark across his throat," Alfred said. "He is completely mute. Someone severed his vocal cords." Cassandra glared at the images on the screen. "Lipov." Tim leaned against his desk and looked toward her. "You think so?" "David wanted silence from me," Cassandra said. "He's supposed to be the same." Tim sighed and sipped his coffee as he leaned closer to the console. "Great. We can't exactly interrogate someone who can't say anything." "He might know how to write," Alfred said. "I wouldn't think so," Stephanie said as she returned to the room. "Bruce said Cassie's dad just raised her in violence or something. Being able to read and write doesn't fall in with that. There's a line of marks on the underside of his left arm. Let me enlarge them." Alfred tapped a few keys and clicked the mouse. An image of the Oddmance's scarred flesh appeared on the screen. Cassandra couldn't see what he was referring to, and even Tim and Stephanie had to squint as Alfred moved over the marks of his cursor. "There are letters here. Looks like R-A-F-A-L. Tim scratched his head, as if he still didn't see anything. "Does that mean something?" "It's a name. The Polish equivalent of Raphael," Alfred said. "Unless they're self-inflicted, that doesn't really mean anything," Stephanie said. "I mean, are they self-inflicted? There's a way you can tell, but I don't know it." "I'd have to examine them longer," Alfred said. "I looked over the information from Miss Cassandra's talk with Shiva. Could you conclude if the man pursuing you is Victor? Rafal may be his first name, if not." "David called him Victor," Cassandra said. "Called him Russian." Eastern Europe and Western Asia have a lot of commonalities. I could be misreading in the first place. It's just something to consider, Alfred said. So he can't talk, but he might be able to read and write. Stephanie rubbed her chin for a moment. Cassie, the report said Lipov gave him orders, right? You know, like, verbally? Yes. Well, then he can understand some language. I guess Lipov wasn't as hardcore as your dad was. Maybe we can talk to him. Maybe he'll understand, somehow. We can try, at least. Tim pushed up from his chair. Let's get him to the holding cell. We can press him for info tomorrow. Night's still got a few hours in it, and I want the chance to get out. I'm getting cabin fever in here. Steph, can you keep an eye on him for the night? Blah. I've got a report on Tuesday. Thought I would have the chance to catch up. I can do it, Cassandra said. Tim frowned. You've got to be exhausted. I'll be fine. I can rest all of tomorrow. Tim motioned to the door. Let's get him moved first, then we'll figure the rest out. They moved the oddmans, stretcher and all, into the bunker's holding cell across from the surveillance room. After a short discussion, Tim and Stephanie stepped into the bunker's elevator. Stephanie with the assurance she'd return shortly with a textbook and her laptop. Cassandra wouldn't have to do anything, they promised. The cell was properly reinforced and delicately electrified for extreme circumstances. All she had to do was watch him and observe if his condition was still stable. Despite the way the oddmans laid, unmoving and unconscious, Cassandra couldn't take her eyes off the screen. She maybe had some assumptions from his movements and behaviors, but she felt she had confirmation. The oddmans was a victim, just like she had been. Questions followed. Was he Lipov's son? How long had he been doing this? Really? What had Lipov done to him? How desperately did he want to be free? Stephanie returned half an hour later, and Cassandra allowed her to concentrate. In spite of that, it was clear studying was a losing effort. Cass? Yes? Wake me if I start dozing off. Cassandra felt sure she should have been tired, but the events of the day left her restless. Without realizing she was doing it, she anxiously tapped at the desk she sat at. She wanted to sleep, but felt completely unable, as if she'd forgotten how. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. She observed the oddman's every breath. Eventually, the crinkle of pages and tapping of keys beside her stopped. Stephanie, as she'd feared, slipped into sleep. Cassandra remained wide awake. She might have watched for half an hour or until dawn. She couldn't tell. But Cassandra's patience was eventually rewarded. It began with a small shake of the head and a slow opening of the eyes. All that was needed to get Cassandra's attention. The oddman slowly took in his surroundings, then rolled as much as he could and squinted to better make out the room. He pushed against his bonds with his good arm, but was too powerfully restrained to make an impact. Then he tried to kick up from the stretcher, but to no avail. The realization that he was trapped slowly overtook his face, and he grit his teeth through the struggle. The oddman beat his hands and feet into the stretcher and craned his neck before rolling his head to the side and bit at the material. Cassandra observed this, at first in confusion, before she carefully looked into his eyes. They were puffing up and red. He was sobbing. Something forced Cassandra out of her seat. Pity, empathy, bad memories. It didn't matter. She emulated the flip of a few switches Tim and Stephanie used earlier, which turned off the electrical barrier and muted the camera. When Stephanie, eyes still closed, stirred enough to ask, "What are you doing?" Cassandra just said, "Bathroom." It was enough that Stephanie seemed to slip back to sleep. Cassandra knew she and Tim wouldn't approve, but she couldn't help herself. The bunker's holding cell wasn't intended for anything long-term or for heavy struggle. It worked mostly off the assumption that so long as the prisoner on the other side of the bars didn't have any superpowers, there was nothing to fear. Cassandra scanned her palm as she entered the holding room connected to the bunker's main chamber. The bars and another pad were all that separated her from the oddmans. He only acknowledged her for a moment before he resumed kicking, biting, and struggling with all his strength. Cassandra stared at him without saying anything at first. She didn't have the words necessary to articulate. Even if she did, would it matter? He must have known they shared a history, even if they'd never met. "Rafal?" The oddman's froze, mouth half full of stretcher. He turned toward Cassandra. A tiny shake ran down his chin before he dug his face away from where she could see. Cassandra felt sure he was sobbing again. She moved closer and again said, "Rafal." Another shake ran through his body. He was more a wounded animal than a young man. His leg was caught in a trap, and all he could do was mule to himself. The sight made Cassandra sick to her stomach. She couldn't watch this any longer. Cassandra thrust her hand onto the panel and slid the door of the cell open. The audience remained turned away, so Cassandra put a hand on his shoulder. She steadied her voice as best she could, with nothing but a rub on his back, and repeated, "Rafal." For minutes, the two remained in silence as the pain pulsated through their beings. Then there was a fire in the side of her stomach. Cassandra remained over the audience, motionless despite the pain, save for a widening in her eyes. She wasn't sure what just happened, or what the horrible pain was. Slowly she looked down. The audience had freed an arm, dug into her utility belt, and stabbed her in the side with one of her own batarangs. Cassandra slowly looked to him, more in shock than anything. The audience pulled the batarang from Cassandra's body and backhanded her as she keeled over in pain. The strike was enough to put her to the ground, as the audience used the weapon to pull at the restraints that held his broken arm. Cassandra gripped her wound, and when she spoke her voice was heavy with breath and desperation. "Please, please don't." The audience paid her no mind. With a few pulls he slipped his broken arm through the restraint. Cassandra pushed back to her feet, kicked his good hand, and knocked the batarang to the floor. With tears of despair and anger in her eyes, Cassandra grabbed a hold of the audience, fingers to the side of his neck, and pressed her thumbs into his throat. "I want to save you!" The audience twisted his face. Cassandra couldn't make out what emotion he must be showing. Then he thrust his good hand open-fisted into her chest and knocked the breath from her lungs. Then he threw another strike, and another, across her center and her arms. By the time Cassandra realized he was striking her pressure points, it was too late to stop him. With her other options limited, Cassandra threw a kick into his face. The audience avoided the strike, but Cassandra hit the stretcher at a bad angle and knocked it over, putting the audience to the ground and smashed apart the wooden frame with her foot. With her arm still rendered useless, Cassandra could only leap on one foot and shout as she fought off the pain. With a last punch to the knee, the audience knocked Cassandra to the ground next to him and trapped her in a headlock. Cassandra shouted and beat her feet against the floor, but nothing loosened his grip. Even as she gasped, she couldn't inhale. Options limited, she shut her eyes, ceased her movements, and played dead. After over a minute without oxygen, the audience released his grip and resumed working at the restraints around his legs. Cassandra silently considered what she could still do as she let a little saliva out of her mouth to improve her performance. She had lost her armor back on the boat, her communicator had fallen from her ear at some point in the struggle, and her arms remained useless. At the moment, it seemed her best move was to wait until she regained some feeling and take the audience by surprise. For a few minutes all she could make out was his struggle. The restraints rubbed and clicked as the audience worked at them. With tiny peeks, Cassandra saw him as he inched closer to freedom. The feeling started to slip back into her arms, but she feared it might not come fast enough. The last restraint near his foot took the longest, but as the audience worked at it, Cassandra felt she'd regained most of the feeling in her arms. It wasn't ideal, it wasn't even desirable, but as the audience stood up, she knew it was her last chance. Cassandra forced herself from the ground and aimed a last punch at the audience's face. And the moment she saw the look in his eyes, it was clear. He knew she was faking it. He'd been preparing for the moment since she started playing dead. The audience sidestepped her strike and threw her to the ground. Before Cassandra could regain her footing, the audience stomped on her left foot hard enough to elicit a sickening crack and a scream of pain. Cassandra forgot all else, grabbed toward her broken foot, and gasped for breath. For one last moment, the audience stood over her. Whatever anger was in his eyes when she walked in, whatever sorrow the name Rafal brought him, everything was gone. There was nothing in that gaze. As she tried to push off the ground a last time, the audience kicked her in the face and cast her into unconsciousness. The longest day of Cassandra's life finally ended.